I do get frustrated sometimes, especially in places like San Francisco, where it's an incredibly politically disengaged community, even though people are constantly striving to do better and they're philanthropically active in some ways. But people, if you're like, who's your mayor? When was the last time you voted? I think many of them wouldn't know.
If you run a business and are looking for space, we're talking 2 of you needing a couple of desks to hundreds of you needing a stunning new office. You need to check out Hubble HQ. They have a beautiful, easy-to-use website where you can find just what you're looking for. And you can book and manage your office viewings through the click of a button. You'll also get a dedicated expert advisor who can help you make the right decision and negotiate the best deal for you. Best thing? These guys won't bore you with jargon, they'll just sort you out. And I should know, I'm a happy customer. Whether your thing is stunning views or fridges full of free booze, you'll find it on Hubble HQ. So go to hubblehq.com/secret leaders to find your perfect office today. With a Forbes listing in 2014 as one of its 30 under 30 for social entrepreneurship, Clara Brenner is championing a new type of venture capitalism that invests in the future of cities. Clara's background working for urban innovation startups led her to question why there weren't other entrepreneurs in this space, ultimately leading to her discovery of funding and regulatory gaps. Long story short, her first urban venture program with co-founding partner Julie Lein was born with the mission of empowering entrepreneurs to solve urban problems. From the success of this company, Clara and Julie continued to widen their impact with Urban Innovation Fund, which closed a $24.5 million seed stage fund in June. With a diverse portfolio of companies under their wing, Urban Innovation Fund is set to dramatically change the urban landscape. So we're here in San Francisco to talk to Clara about that. So welcome, Clara. Thank you very much for being a guest.
Thanks for having me.
How are you this morning?
I'm great. It's Friday, which is always good.
And you've already told me that you had a Danish for breakfast. So
you're
starting well.
Signature breakfast move. I love it. Good Danish.
So we like to do a quick fire round just to get a very quick idea about our guests. So city break or beach holiday, or neither, because you're San Francisco, right?
I'm a country person, actually. If I'm not going to be at work, I really like being in the country.
You can't give a third answer, dare you? I did my research. Okay, so office or work from home?
Office.
And baseball or basketball?
In our household, it's a rugby household.
Oh, that's super unusual. How come?
My husband's South African, so it's on all the time.
Okay, fine. That makes a lot more sense.
Yeah.
Summer or winter?
Summer.
Kindle or paperback?
Audiobook.
Same. I should have definitely
Love
just
a good
put
audiobook.
Same. Email or phone call?
Phone call.
An early bird or night owl?
Very early bird.
What time do you wake up this morning?
4:30.
Oh my God. You've got the same jet lag I do. East Coast or West Coast?
Definitely West Coast.
And work or play?
Work.
Finally, very important, but cats or dogs?
Dogs.
Okay. And your favorite childhood memory, actually?
Friday night dinners with my family.
Oh, nice. Okay. That's a very wholesome memory. Right, we're going to crack straight into it. So it's time to find out a little bit more about you and the business. So firstly, can you tell us something about yourself, your background, why you got into all of this, basically?
Sure. So about myself, I run a fund called the Urban Innovation Fund. We invest in startups shaping the future of cities. The fund is about 2 years old, but I've been investing in the space for about 5 years. Yeah, I'm all about cities all the time.
But there must be a reason. I mean, that was your short PR answer. But what's your reason? What was your motivating factor? Did you just walk around a really shit city one day and you're like, this place is ruined, I can do much better? There must be a starting point on that hero's journey.
My hero's journey, I guess, began in Washington, D.C., where I grew up. And the two big industries in D.C. are government and real estate, which were both really interesting to me sort of as I was considering a potential career path. And when I went to college, I wasn't sure which direction I wanted to go. So I ended up writing kind of my undergraduate thesis on the historical relationship in Manhattan between private developers and local government, trying to figure out, why did Lower Manhattan turn out the way it did, and ultimately who got a bigger say in how New York became the amazing place that it is. And ultimately, it became pretty clear to me that both industries have a tremendous amount of influence over what happens in our cities, but real estate developers have a lot more fun and they make a lot more money and they get to be a lot more creative oftentimes. So actually after college, I went into real estate development back in Washington, D.C., which I loved, but really ultimately decided I didn't like having a boss. So I went back to business school where I thought, I would get the skills to basically create my own real estate development firm. But while I was there, I got the tech bug. So I ended up working briefly for a real estate tech company called Fundrise, which essentially is like a Betterment type product, but for private real estate assets. They've gone on to raise about $50 million, so they're awesome. But it really opened my eyes in terms of the role that technology has to play also in terms of shaping our urban environments. And that kind of set me on the path that I'm on now.
And when did you move to San Francisco?
6 years ago, so right after business school.
Okay. And you co-founded Tummel before that. So it's a non-profit startup accelerator, as I understand it.
Yeah.
And then Urban Innovation Fund as well with Julie Lein. So was she your partner in the last fund as well?
Yeah. So she and I were actually classmates at business school. And we really came together around our love for startups solving city problems, although I don't think we would have called it that at the time. So she had been working at what was then a small company, is now a really big company here in the Bay Area called Revolution Foods. Essentially, they're a healthy school meal provider. So they compete with the likes of these, Airmarks of the world, the big industrial catering firms, but they hire from the local community. They source fresh ingredients. They prioritize education about health. I think they do something like $200 million in annual revenue now. So they're amazing. And Fundrise was a really transformative experience for me. And this was like when Lyft was just getting off the ground and Airbnb was just getting off the ground. And we felt like all of these companies had something in common. I don't think they would self-identify as social impact companies, but they were all having a really profound influence over what was happening in our communities, and from our perspective in a good way. And we were struggling to kind of group them together, what to call them. We kind of coalesced around the name Urban Innovation Startups. And we ended up doing a big research study, kind of harnessing Julie's brain power, since she used to be a political pollster in a previous life, to kind of try and figure out how to describe what they had in common. And ultimately, through our research, we found that they actually have two big things in common. The first is they have a lot of trouble raising early stage capital. A lot of them have a physical component to what they do. So if you're a bike share system, you need a whole fleet of bikes. If you're Revolution Foods, you need a physical culinary center where you can produce those meals, from day one. Or you're in some kind of like a new economy or a sharing economy type space, in which case more institutional investors just want to see that you have a lot of traction before they're going to take a risk on you. So that's big challenge number one. Big challenge number two was that pretty much across the board, all of these companies face pretty significant regulatory and political hurdles as they look to scale. If you're Uber and Lyft, you're like breaking every law known to man. If you're selling into a school district, it's incredibly highly regulated, highly unionized. So we ended up taking our research to Blackstone when we graduated, and tried to sort of pitch them on the idea of creating a showcase investment portfolio of all startups doing good things for our cities. While
was this Tummel? Sorry, this was Tummel.
Yeah, that was Tummel. So the idea was,
you couldn't. It sounds almost like it could be interchangeable in
Totally.
the sense of your focus.
Yeah. So we basically incubated 38 companies focusing on, startups that were solving city problems, helping them with their regulatory and political challenges. And the portfolio did really, really well in a very short period of time. So really strong returns with companies like, we were the first investors in Chariot, which is a commuter shuttle service that 2 years after our initial investment was acquired by Ford to serve as the backbone of their new smart mobility business line. We are the first investors in a company called Neighborly, which is like a crowd investing platform for municipal bonds, which has gone on to do really well. The portfolio was very strong from very sort of traditional business metrics, but also we were able to track the urban outcomes of all these companies. And actually, for that portfolio, 76% of those companies had a woman or person of color on the founding team, which is really, really unusual in Silicon Valley. And so that kind of gave us the credibility to launch the Urban Innovation Fund.
Seem to be breaking quite a lot of molds there. You've got, objectively speaking, from the outside looking in, both of the founders being females, probably quite unusual with
Very
Silicon
unusual,
Valley.
yeah.
Yeah. And then, of course, like breaking all the molds as well with, you said 76%?
Uh-huh.
I mean, that's quite amazing. So,
Yeah.
Going off topic a little bit, but we'll come back to it. How do you feel as a female founder at VC when people draw attention to that stuff? Are you like, yeah, that's great, and I'm glad people are talking about it? Or are you more of the opinion of like, don't talk about it in the sense of like my gender, who gives a fuck? It shouldn't be spoken about that way. Like, where do you sit on the side here? Because obviously it is a lot rarer here than maybe in other parts of the world.
I think it's great. I mean, I don't want to be funded because of my gender or the fact that our portfolio has an incredibly demographically diverse array of founders. That shouldn't be the only reason. But for us, we are really trying to show other institutional investors that they can do this too. They can hire in a diverse manner. They can invest in quote unquote non-traditional founders. They can target companies that are solving really meaningful challenges and make a lot of money doing it. So for us, while it's not what we lead with, we're super happy to talk about it.
Okay, now coming back to the companies you have invested in, which in themselves are pretty diverse.
Very.
So from doing my research, I saw that one has created educational software and games for children, another provides self-driving electric vehicles for deliveries, one providing breast milk and nursing supplies shipping service. So what links them together? Like, what is the thread that you look for?
So we describe ourselves as investing in startups shaping the future of cities. So using technology to make the lives of people who live in cities better. And that can really run the gamut in terms of industry vertical from traditional smart city sectors like transportation and utility management, but we also include areas like education and the future of work. When we think about the future of cities, we try to prioritize problems that are at top of mind for mayors around the US and ideally beyond. And companies that are solving the kind of problems that mayor's offices across the country prioritize but haven't necessarily been able to tackle sufficiently on their own. Where there are big problems, we think there's a great opportunity for scalable technology to step in and hopefully augment what government can do.
So is the government technically a potential customer for a lot of these? How does it work? Or is it more state specific?
Sometimes, but not usually. I think for many startups, government is not a good first customer, frankly.
Unless you're Palantir.
Unless you're Palantir.
Unless you're Peter Thiel, and then everything's okay.
Yeah, exactly. So I think we're open-minded about GovTech, but it's certainly not our primary focus. For us, it's much more about companies that are tackling interesting problems and being thoughtful about the regulatory or political environment in which they're playing, just because that's a problem we see a lot of companies face and don't necessarily take seriously until it's too late.
So in terms of your career, it feels like almost straight off the back you've gone into investing in the venture capital world. Is that right, roughly?
Yeah, sure.
And so how do you know that you're the right type, so to speak? When you're growing up, like, is it an ambition to become a venture capitalist? Like, for you personally, was that always what you wanted to do? Or is it more the interest in, like, the change in the world and this becomes a really good vehicle to do it?
It never occurred to me that venture capital was a career until I went to business school. But I knew that whoever was in charge of the money was in charge. That's always been pretty clear to me. And so understanding that there were all of these companies that could be doing great things and founders who could be doing great things if they had access to capital was something that was really exciting to me. And it's funny, growing up, my mom worked for the World Bank, and I always thought I'm going to do the opposite of whatever she did. She worked at this big bureaucratic institution and she loved her job, but to me it just sounded sort of horrendous, just in terms of the complicated nature of operating in a very large, complicated organization. But someone pointed out to me recently that I basically have the same job that she does, but I invest in slightly different companies. And I think that's right. I think I've always been aware that, when you are able to direct capital, you have a lot of opportunities to touch the lives of many, many people.
One of the aspects of being a VC is obviously being able to spot the next thing, spot trends, and I guess people, psychology, like the personality behind the mission-driven person, because out here, I'm sure it's very easy to find people who are very passionate because you've got just the culture out here, right? Everyone's so energetic and really thinking about how hard to work and what problems to solve, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're cut out to be a founder. So
sure.
How do you feel as a venture capitalist, you're able to spot the winners?
I think part of it is just personality fit. Are these people that we want to work with on a day-to-day basis? Are they thoughtful about what they say and who they say it to, which is pretty basic. But for us, we also talk about a maniacal focus on money, frankly. Founders that want money and are going to do whatever it takes to get money are the right kind of founders for us, just because I think there is such a need for scale and such a need to not just have a good idea and not just have a good team, but be able to marshal the resources to get it done. Those are usually the kind of founders that we like to see.
And to date, who's been the most exciting company you've worked with and why?
You can't pick a favorite, but
So says everyone.
so says everybody because it's true.
Okay.
But a company that we've been really excited about is that company Chariot that I mentioned earlier. They always demonstrated so much momentum, and that was one of the most exciting parts. Like when we first met Ali, he came to us and he said, I have an idea that, there should be a private bus company here in the Bay Area. And we said, okay, sure, come back to us when you've done something. And a week later, he came back and he basically said, I've rented a van, I'm driving it around the marina, and I'm picking up strangers, and people seem to like it. And even that week, I was starting to see on social media, people I knew were taking this bus. And then, a few weeks after that, he'd found someone else to drive it, and he'd started a website. And it was so exciting to meet a founder who had an idea, and just every time you talked to him, he was executing towards his vision. And so, of course, it was super exciting and obviously rewarding when he was acquired pretty quickly.
What do the founders of Calm, Planet Organic, Photobox, Moonpig, Shazam, Mumsnet, Last Minute, WeTransfer, Albright, and the School of Life all have in common? They all put their brain first and start their day with Heights. Heights is the smart supplement for brain health and cognitive performance using plant-based, natural ingredients designed to help you thrive. Listeners of this show can get 25% off their first month with the code LEADERSHEIGHTS at www.yourheights.com. So, for the listeners that don't know a lot about what the future of cities looks like and what urban innovation concepts and ideas might be, can you give us some ideas of what's going on inside your portfolio? What's some of the most crazy shit you've seen? What's some of the unusual stuff? Can you share some stories to give us some insights about what's going on in this part of the world?
Sure. I mean, we have 9 verticals where we tend to invest and where we see the most deals. So areas like transportation, education and workforce, housing in the built environment, and we see, a ton of deals across all of those areas. Transportation is certainly the area where people, when you say urban, I think that's usually where their mind goes first, and we've definitely been active investors in that space. So a recent company we invested in was a company called UDelv. They're electric autonomous last mile delivery vehicle. So they started by selling all the buzzwords in one.
Yeah. Is it AI and blockchain too, or not quite?
No, not quite. They started by selling to small and medium sized retailers who wanted to compete with the likes of Amazon. We as customers think, yes, of course we want to support, local businesses and regional businesses. But, when you need toilet paper, you need toilet paper. And if Amazon can get it to you same day and you don't have to leave your house, that's kind of an unbeatable obstacle for a lot of these smaller businesses. And so that's where they started, but they actually are about to make a big announcement with a national retailer as well. And so it's been interesting to see how quickly that space has evolved even in the last few years. So I think transportation is certainly an area where there's a lot of innovation. Some of the more off-the-wall companies, I don't know if it's off the wall, but when I tell people about it, they're usually confused at first. It was that company you mentioned earlier, briefly, Milk Stork, the breast milk shipping company. So for many of your listeners, they're probably not familiar, but the US has a really terrible maternity and paternity leave policy. On a national level, there's no paid parental leave at all. And so a lot of women in particular return to work very, very quickly after having children, which is a tremendous hurdle. And especially big companies, or really all companies, have trouble retaining women when they become moms, or if those women do come back to work, often they select career paths that might not lead to the most senior levels of power within those companies, just because those roles oftentimes involve a lot of travel.
You definitely don't want to hear how long you get in the UK.
I'm aware, believe
Okay.
me, and it makes me feel sad for myself. But basically, Milk Stork is a breast milk shipping company. So you can buy the service for yourself direct to consumer, but they sell to big companies like Goldman Sachs and McKinsey and Google and Microsoft, who essentially offer Milk Stork as an employee benefit. So women can basically go on to their employee portal, say, this is where I'm going for work, this is how long I'm going to be there. And when they arrive on their business trip, a delightful kit is waiting for them. They can pump their breast milk, put it in the kit, it chills it and overnights at home and either integrates with their health benefits or the company will pay for it. It's really awesome. I think it's the one company where I did customer references where people were literally crying, telling me how it totally changed the trajectory of their careers. And, I think it does have applications internationally where there is better parental leave in terms of vacation. So a lot of women, especially the direct-to-consumer line, women use it for just general travel, and they're growing like wildfire. They're an awesome company, and we're really excited to back them. And sometimes people ask, how does that fit within your vision of urban innovation? And for us, it fits very squarely within our workforce development area. If you want to have the workforce of the future that really is equitable and accessible and where people can do their best work, we think that companies like Milkstork are great bets to make.
Okay, so tell us a little bit about your perspective on the future of cities. So what would a San Francisco look like in 10 years?
The San Francisco I want or the San Francisco we're going to get?
I'd love to hear both. The San Francisco you're going to get might be too depressing.
It might be.
But let's do both of them.
No, I'm optimistic. I think the San Francisco of the future, like so many cities, is going to be...
like Blade Runner.
Yeah, just like Blade Runner, but also I think a real hub of sort of multimodal transit. I think historically when you think about transit in cities, it's usually driving, walking, or you take, light rail somewhere, or bus maybe. And now we have scooters, we have moto scooters, we have bikes, we have electric bikes. I think it's going to be important for cities of the future to find a way to knit them all together into one sort of cohesive option for people. And I'm not sure if the city is actually going to be the one in charge of doing that knitting, or whether it will be some public-private partnership with a company like Lyft or Uber. But it definitely seems like that's the direction it's going. And I think that's really, really important. The big challenge that so many cities face is around infrastructure and funding infrastructure, especially here in places like New York, where you hear about how the subway line is basically a mess. But same is true in so many cities. And so I think there's lots of opportunities for public finance innovation. So companies like Neighborly, for example, the crowd investing platform for municipal bonds, I think financial innovation is just as important as physical innovation as well.
And do you think things like Elon Musk's Boring Company is like a good example of someone just taking the onus on themselves because they're like, I live in LA, it drives me mad, the city's not going to do anything about it, I'm going to do it myself? Or do you think that's a bit of an unusual and dangerous way to behave?
I think it's certainly unusual. I think the challenge with Silicon Valley is that innovation sometimes seems easier than solving the problem, even though we know what the solution is, which is funding our existing infrastructure. It's just much harder to do something new. It's much easier to get people's attention. So, while the Boring Company is intriguing, and certainly we need innovation in all sectors all the time, and I wouldn't be in this business if I didn't think it was worth investing in those types of opportunities. I do get frustrated sometimes, especially in places like San Francisco, where it's an incredibly politically disengaged community, even though people are constantly striving to do better, and they're very philanthropically active in some ways. But people, if you're like, who's your mayor? Who's your supervisor? When was the last time you voted? I think many of them wouldn't know.
And you actually didn't answer the previous question, but what is the San Francisco you're going to get?
I think it depends on who we elect in the next few years.
So you can tell that you worked in Washington for a while with these answers.
I'm actually more optimistic than I have been in a while. I think people are starting to recognize that it's important to engage in order to get the outcomes you want. And I think a good example of that is the scooter wars that have been happening here. So, a bunch of scooters essentially launched without a permit here and were shut down by the city, who's now taking a more proactive role in kind of monitoring the innovation that's happening in our public space. They went through what I thought was a pretty short and clear permitting process. They essentially selected 2 companies to get back on the streets, and it was good. It was good. I think cities are starting to get smarter about how they deal with these companies, and my goal is not for them to go away, but I think it's all better for us when government understands what's going on and takes an active role in making sure that companies don't run amok. So I thought it was pretty good. I think the experience with companies like Uber and Airbnb have educated a lot of cities about how to approach innovation. I don't think they're ever going to be proactive. Like people talk like, oh, cities need to learn how to, anticipate what's going to happen. And I just don't see that ever happening. But if cities can move more quickly and be more responsive and transparent about what they want out of the deal, I think we'll all be better.
But they do take a very much the classic startup mentality, of course, but ask for forgiveness, not permission approach to things. And as someone who worked in Washington, what do you think about that kind of behavior? Because you're right, like we're learning a lot. after the fact.
Yeah.
But it's such a free-for-all.
Totally.
There's been lessons, and I think this is probably why the scooter scenarios had such backlash, because it's like, not again.
Not again. And the two companies that ultimately were selected for permits were the two companies who didn't launch their product without a permit. And I think
who were they? Were they Bird and Lion? Is that
no?
assumption?
So they didn't.
Okay.
They did. It was two of the smaller companies. So a company called Scoot that already runs kind of like moped type sharing here in the city, and then a newer company called Skip. So I don't know if that will last, but I think it was really a good teachable moment for a lot of startups to understand that cities are getting smarter too. I think it's too much to expect them to proactively anticipate all of the new innovations, since even I am an investor in this space and I have no idea what's going to be next. But I think cities are starting to catch on, and entrepreneurs as a result are figuring it out. I mean, so many of the most highly valued private companies out there today are working in extremely regulated spaces. Palantir, as you mentioned, Airbnb, Uber, like these are highly regulated spaces. And while Uber may have been able to break things initially, they have a huge government affairs team now for a reason. And I think that more and more we're starting to see even smaller companies kind of embrace that, if not collaborative, at least awareness that they didn't have before.
Do you see like regulatory barriers essentially as a competitive advantage? Because you obviously work in the space, and I guess, the more you do it, the more understanding and expertise you'll get.
Totally.
Yeah, so is that just a huge area of opportunity for you?
Well, when Chariot launched, they weren't the only commuter bus sort of shuttle service in the Bay Area. In fact, there were a number of better funded competitors in the market, including one backed by Andreessen Horowitz. And they were shut down by the California Public Utilities Commission within 30, 45 days after launch. That's stupid. You know what the rules are, and that could have been avoided. I think from our perspective, the reason Chariot was so interesting was because they knew what rules existed, and there's a reason that they had jumper vans and not bigger buses, because they're regulated differently. They integrated with public benefits programs like WageWorks, so they were price comparable with Muni. They hired full-time drivers when everybody else was hiring 1099 part-time drivers. They hired from the local community, and they told all of the local supervisors about all the jobs they were creating. There are things you can do to not just avoid getting in trouble, but also proactively win in the space if you do it right, we think.
And clearly vindicated with your results as well.
I'd like to think so, yeah.
I'd like to say so. And once it's said on a podcast,
yeah,
it's just
it's real.
fact. Yeah, exactly. Sorry to interrupt, but I just wanted to tell you guys about the team I use for hiring tech talent, the amazing LaFosse Associates. They're specialists at finding the best people in technology, digital, and change management, and they have an incredible program that takes leadership teams through pre- and post-funding recruitment and scaling headaches. I know you know what I'm talking about. So if you're looking to scale a tech team, you need LAFOSSE.com. Now back to today's secret leader. Fast forward into the future, it's 2050, and there's an expectation of 2/3 of the world's population is going to be living in urban areas, so in cities by that point. Mm-hmm. So what are the main urban challenges you think that would help us as a society tackle that future? What are the main areas of opportunity? How are you going to make the world a better place in that incredibly compact scenario?
Oh boy, an area where we would love to see more innovation, especially my co-founder, Julie, this is like her pet area, is aging and aging in place. There are so many opportunities to deliver care, especially in people's homes if you're living in a dense urban environment. And we're starting to see more innovation. I mean, if I see another like scanner that tells you when an old person falls, I'm going to kill myself. But, I think there's a lot of opportunity in that space, and we would love to see more innovation there.
Talk to me about this scanner that tells you when an old person falls.
Whether there's lots of monitoring systems. I think we've been pitched by at least 6 in the last year, where it basically monitors movement or breathing or sleep patterns or sounds, or literally is a video camera that watches old people essentially, and monitors them for falls, which is a huge driver of injury and death for the elderly, which is, legitimate. We would love to see a solution in that space, but I think people could be pushing themselves a little bit more when it comes to innovation.
It just sounds like the next update on an Alexa anyway.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah. And that's kind of the problem. Like every time they do more and more, you're like, oh no, it's just another feature you could just add as a bolt-on.
I try to keep all sort of voice tools out of my house as best as I can because
They're definitely
it
listening
makes me
to you.
nervous. Yeah, for sure.
It's great. I saw a really good meme the other day, which was people in the 1950s were all like, hey man, the freaking government's listening to us every moment. Let's check all of our phones, take out all the bugs. And people today are like, hey, wiretap.
Yeah.
What's the latest weather update?
My husband tried to explain to me why it was, he brought a Google Home with him one day and tried to explain to me that it was valuable because you could, ask it what the weather was or what time it was. And I just didn't find it compelling. I mean, it's magical. It's a magical consumer experience, but the pros didn't outweigh the cons for me.
See, I have it because I'm lazy. But interestingly, for my mum, who is a little bit of a technophobe, as a lot of mums are, it's amazing for her.
Totally. I get it.
Yeah. And it's really interesting watching older people use voice technology and how literally, like for people our age, it is just completely lazy.
My dad does it. Like he'll text me or I'll hear him, writing a text to his wife and I'll say, Victoria, comma. I'm very, it seems longer and more annoying, but he loves it. He will only communicate via voice on his phone if he can help it.
Joy cat emoji.
Yes, not that you're joking, but that's exactly right.
That's brilliant. Now I'm wondering if that's how my mum texts me her emojis.
I'm sure.
Yeah, she always picks up random emojis. I'm like, how did you find that one? It's probably just speaking to it. Okay, so I understand that the Urban Innovation Fund, sorry to bring it back on track,
do it.
Shame on us. I understand that the Urban Innovation Fund has a very strong emphasis on diversity within the portfolio, as we were mentioning at the start. So 76% of the startups you've supported have a woman or person of color on the founding team.
That's it, Tummel. At the fund, it's 73%. But yes,
73 at
basically.
the fund. But like I said, once you say it on a podcast, it becomes real. 3% just got added to your number, and they're probably joining as we speak.
It's true. If we add another company, it'll change again.
It's 93%. Is there an element of you saying no on the basis of like a box tick, in a sense? Is it that strategic?
No. So we don't actively select for any demographic factors. It's just been kind of a happy and consistent accident for all of our investing work. Okay. And I can only speculate as to why it is. I mean, we're both women, Julie and myself, and I'm sure that means we have our own biases. But even at the top of the funnel, we've seen that one statistic is 55% of the companies we see at the very top of the funnel. And I think for this fund now, we've seen about 3,000 deals. 55% have a woman on the founding team. So it's not like we're just really selecting towards the women. But I do think it's helpful to have women and people of color in the room. And that's, our associate. We have an associate as a person of color. And again, not something that we're actively selecting for, but I think means we have different networks. We have different biases or lack of biases that allow us to be maybe a little bit more open-minded. Some people have suggested that because of the industry verticals that we're investing in, that might also play a role.
That was going to be my question, is it just, is it part of it that you're in essentially some social good space and women are nicer people?
That's possible.
I'm not going to put you on record for it, don't worry.
Yeah, I think a lot of our founders would die rather than self-identify as a social impact company. Some identify as mission-driven or world positive or nothing at all, and there are very good reasons to want to or not want to put yourself in that bucket. But I do think, we do focus on companies that are solving, at least what we perceive to be meaningful challenges. Perhaps that's motivating a different set of people to think about technology and entrepreneurship as a sort of career path for them. Although, again, generalization, and there's no real way to know.
Sure. Okay, so you've raised a bunch of money for a seed fund. How much of it, percentage-wise or dollar-wise, whatever you feel more comfortable sharing, have you so far distributed? And I guess, that is leading on to the question of what's next for you in the fund.
Sure. So we're a $24.5 million fund. We've made 15 investments. I think our overall portfolio size will end up being about 25 companies. So we still have quite a ways to go, and we've allocated about half the fund for follow-on investing. So that's a really big priority for us. So yeah, it's going to be a busy year. So
are you going out to fundraise again anytime soon?
Not anytime soon, but I'm sure in the next few years we will. And I'm already steeling myself for that. Although actually, I really like the fundraising process.
Because
you're a masochist. I think it's a really cool opportunity to meet a lot of very, very interesting people. There's also something kind of immediately rewarding, when you ask for something and people say yes or no, at least you know. Whereas with a company you invest and it's going to be, 5, 7, 10 years before you know if it was a good idea or a stupid idea. So there's something kind of stabilizing about that experience when you're dealing with so many awesome but incredibly volatile companies.
Okay, so just moving away from what you do and more who you are, just because obviously female founder, VC, SF, it all sounds like you probably don't get any sleep or have any downtime whatsoever. Is that true? Talk to us about work-life balance. Is there such a thing for you?
Totally. I mean, I think that was one of the reasons why I was so excited to work with Julie. I think we have very similar views about making time for our family. We both love and are very close with our parents and our friends. And so I think we've been really deliberate about how we schedule our time. So like I get up really, really early, but every day at 6:00, I'm out of the office. Occasionally there are work events in the evening, which of course I go to, but I think I was very deliberate about setting up my schedule, and Julie's kind of the opposite. She's a real night owl. But the point is, as long as you get your work done, I don't really care if you're in the office on a Saturday or late at night. There's no merit badge for doing that. So I think that that's been really good in terms of the culture we've tried to set for us and for our employees.
So having found success as an entrepreneur at an early age, have you actually found it hard to maintain friendships, relationships with old friends? How do you find that kind of transition?
No, I mean, I'm super deliberate about it, and I think so is Julie, and that's been really good. I mean, I try to make time almost every day to try and see someone who's not work-related, and every Friday we have dinner at our house, so we don't go out on Friday nights, and we invite people over, and I think that's been a really good opportunity to, on a regular basis stay engaged with everybody, and that's just something we started doing when I was little, and I think has been a really nice thing to bring back as an adult.
You're much more disciplined than I am. I'm awful at seeing my friends, sadly. Right. Would you say, if you had to choose any city to live in the world, would it be San Francisco, or are you mostly here because the business opportunities are just so fantastic?
Definitely, I would be in San Francisco.
Oh, yes? You're here for life?
I'm in it to win it in San Francisco, for sure. I mean, if you said you're going to live in London for the rest of your life, I would be happy. If you said you're going to live in Detroit for the rest of your life, I would be happy. I think there's so many amazing cities out there, but for me, there just came a time where I felt really strongly about picking a place and getting to know my neighbors and the local philanthropic community and who my elected officials were and those types of things.
Someone in San Francisco has to know that.
Somebody, most people don't. But for me, that was really important. And so I picked San Francisco.
So one of the, and this is a harder one because just talking to you, it sounds like everything's been on the up and up and up, and perhaps that's the case. But one of the things that's very common when we talk to entrepreneurs, of course, is, they've had some colossal fuck-ups and really dark days. And that's, usually the stuff that they're very comfortable and able to share because it's part of what shaped them on for the next journey.
Yeah.
Have there been any moments like that for you so far? Any great fails before the next success? And if not, does that just make you terrified about what's to come?
No, I mean, I think the thing that Julie and I think about is that there's fails every single day. And, we'll talk to an entrepreneur who's agonizing because, they've pitched 10 VCs and they've gotten no's. And I try to explain to them, do you know how many people we had to pitch to raise this fund? Like, you're just going to get a ton of no's and you have to steel yourself towards it. And even when we were starting Tummel, I mean, the idea of creating essentially a showcase investment portfolio of startups doing good things for the community while also pursuing market rate returns, like we got laughed at all the time. No one really understood what we were trying to do. And it just takes, I think, a lot of self-direction. And for me, I was just lucky to have Julie around, as a really good friend, but also an awesome co-founder. You need someone who you can cry with and, be dejected with and then be excited when it works out. But, it's not like it was like I woke up and was like, I'm going to start a VC firm. And then I did. It took a really long time to do.
How long did you take to raise it?
2 years.
Okay.
And it was a great experience. I wouldn't trade it for the world, but, it involves a lot of ups and downs along the way.
What's the greatest piece of advice you think you've ever been given?
I get lots of good advice. I try to ask everybody for advice. But one piece of advice I was thinking about recently, so I went to a small girls' school in Washington, D.C., and the motto of the school was find a way or make one. And I think that is kind of representative of what I try to do. And I think it's a good motto for everybody.
Okay. And final question before we let you go and do some good in the world and invest in amazing founders. What is the one change you'd like to see in the Silicon Valley ecosystem over the next 5 years? Like, what's the most important thing for you which would demonstrate progress and make you really fulfilled and happy?
I would like the Urban Innovation Fund to be like the biggest, baddest, best venture fund in the world. That would make me very happy. But also, I would love to see more women investors in the space. I think, you won't see more women founders until you see more women investors.
Thank you very much.
Thanks
really
for having
appreciate
me.
the time. Next week on Secret Leaders.
Being the person who found Uber or Calm and was just involved in those companies from the beginning, that would be a pretty good way of determining that I was amongst the greatest investors of all time. And so I just figured, what's a good, crazy goal? 400 investments in 4 years.
That was Jason Calacanis, the best angel investor in the world, according to, well, him. He even wrote a book about it called How to Angel Invest. In fairness, he knows a thing or two. He was the first angel investor in Uber, and one of the first in our friends from the show, Calm, who've since gone on to become a billion-dollar company. Well done to Michael and Alex. So, if you want to know how to pick a winner and hear a masterclass in lacking humility, then you are in for a big old treat. Tune in next week or you'll miss out. We hope you enjoyed this episode. It was brought to you by your host, that's me, Dan Murray-Serter, producer, Rich Martell, edited by Harry Morton of Lower Street Media, and if you've heard this, it'll probably have something to do with Jennifer Osman in Canada. You'll also notice throughout this series we've got some beautiful illustrations made for every episode, and that's all thanks to Christina Naru of smartupvisuals.com. You can check out show notes, transcripts, and our upcoming Secret Leaders live events on secretleaders.com. If you haven't yet, hit subscribe on whatever media player you use. Just follow us at Secret Leaders on Instagram or at Secret Leaders 1 on Twitter. And tell just one friend about how frickin' awesome this episode is. If you want to go the extra mile, I'm at Dan Murray-Serter on Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn, and we'd love to see you take some screenshots of the episode you're listening to and share it across your social media. It'll bring a tear to our eye and joy to our hearts. See you next week. Tune in, or you'll miss out. 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 In, or you'll miss